So James, Matt, and Jose, thank you very much for joining us here in the Humanity 2.0 studio. So the topic of today's conversations is about the role of kind of companies and corporations in the world. And I think for a long time now, the narrative has been that companies are kind of like the enemy of mankind. And that seems to be changing. So what I wanted to ask you is what has kind of precipitated this change in perception? Any of you have any thoughts on that to get us rolling?
Yeah, I think for one thing, some companies have figured out that their bottom line and doing good in the community can work together harmoniously. You look at something that affects a company over the long term like climate change, that'll scare you. That'll scare your shareholders. That'll scare your insurers. And enlightened companies have decided to take steps, independent of regulatory bodies or independent of shareholder activism in order to help them, 20, 30 years out. So that's part of it. I think a second part of it is that where in so many spaces where we used to look to government for solutions, governments have either failed or have simply ignored a lot of the responsibilities that were once given to them. And that's in part because there have been taxpayer revolts. It's in part because of mistrust of government. It's a rise of authoritarianism and of kind of faux populism, and things like immigration crises demanding most or all of the attention of government. So these two forces combined have put, I think, companies, responsible companies at least, in a position of leadership that probably wasn't the case 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, to hop on that, actually, it's also that the paradigm is changing because companies are being asked to be responsible for their shareholders, for their communities in which they operate. They also are beginning to see that there is this upside in being more sustainable. And, my focus of my work is mostly on manufacturing and just regular industry, is now looking at these results and saying, okay, we got to do a better job, better material and better energy usage. But the metaphor I like to use, and I've heard this from a lot of the companies we work with at MIT, is, 40 years ago, everybody knew quality cost extra when we had to produce a product. Everybody knew that. And then Toyota came along and said, no, actually, if you do things right, quality is part of the process that actually makes you more economically sustainable. And so just like everybody knew back then, quality costs extra, but it actually is the opposite. I think that's what's beginning to happen also in the paradigm of how businesses operate. Everybody knows sustainability is going to be an extra thing that we have to do as a company. That's not the case. I think exactly a lot of enlightened companies that are undertaking these initiatives are realizing, oh, we're using less water, right, we're using less energy, we're using less materials. As a result, we're actually spending less, so our financial performance is better. So that is going to change, and I think that's the beginning of a revolution, honestly.
And I think a key is companies can act much faster than governments can a lot of times. Again, when there is that big hole that's left there, obviously companies are taking up the cause, but they have the momentum to move really fast in certain situations. Right? We've all worked with governments. It takes a very long time to get things done. And you can put a consortium of companies together rather quickly, big or small, and hopefully more small actually, because the nimble seem to be really the ones that will take up the cause on the ground especially, and not some of these mega corporations.
It's worth saying too that I think a lot of the change is consumer driven. You have, particularly with millennials and Gen Z consumers and employees, people who are looking to companies to have a social mission. I'm going to make my choice in the marketplace by buying this pair of sunglasses and not that pair of sunglasses. I want to work for a company that's going to make a difference in the world as opposed to just deliver maximum profit to shareholders. That's changed the equation. So the companies, again, the enlightened companies have recognized that they need to adapt to that, and that there's actually value in appealing to that consumer.
Yeah, and actually, it's not only the consumers, it's actually these enlightened companies themselves that are also asking their suppliers to be sustainable, right? To actually undertake these activities. And so it's now becoming kind of a mass movement.
Yeah, I mean, even Walmart, which at one point was sort of
Absolutely.
the epitome of what you were talking about, the enemy that's ruining mom and pop. They've made a commitment to the entire supply chain to be sustainable by very soon, I think. And they have so much power with those partners that they can really force the change in a way that governments probably couldn't.
Let me ask you a question. So what's really driving this? Is it because they're going to make more money if they are more sustainable and if they invest in quality? Is it about money, or is it about loyalty from their customers? Which, of course, I understand there's correlations there to making money. What is really driving this new trend in business?
I want to say it's both, right? They're going to make more money, as we have heard, but to me, I think it's the trust factor, right? Because it's very easy for company or consumers to jump around with companies. You can buy anything anywhere online at any time for the most part. So to engage that trust and that loyalty with the consumer, with the end user, giving them the quality experience, giving them the correct choice that, yes, I'm shopping with this organization because they're sustainable compared to this one, especially now with the current market, with millennials coming, them having babies, that there's going to be a whole another kind of layer of this coming through as well.
And so it's actually, competitive advantage. It's just that simple. If you're not doing this and your consumers are asking for you to do this, and the companies that you're competing with are doing this, you're just going to become irrelevant. That is just the nature of the market.
And the consumer will know immediately because of social media. I mean, as with every other thing that gets discussed, social media was a real inflection point here because now, if you think about what Nike went through with its factories in the 90s, that information would be instantaneously broadcast to every potential consumer and would be, tremendously damaging. It was pretty damaging as it was, but that type of information, you simply can't keep it out of the public eye for very long.
It reminds me of a documentary that came out many years ago called The Corporation, and basically in the documentary, the corporations were the ones that were trashing the planet, and governments and regulation were basically the ones kind of protecting us. Now, what's interesting about this conversation is we haven't discussed government very much anymore. So what is the role of government now in driving innovation and change, right? How has kind of globalization in this new world in which we're dealing with multinational corporations, how has that kind of changed the paradigm?
I would say, excuse me, with government, they need to, in some areas, actually step out of the way and let the companies run their sustainable models. Sometimes there's, again, red tape and frameworks that you have to go through in certain jurisdictions to operate. When you're trying to have an impact at the end user level, right, at the consumer level, that's good for both that country, the world. Sometimes they just need to step aside in some regards.
But I think there are other areas where we need more government regulation, and I think that the European governments continue to demonstrate their areas in regulation of both marketplaces and the environment where government can play an important, critical leadership role. I think we probably need more of that in the United States than we currently have. But I agree with Matt that the best role that government can play in a lot of these areas is to negotiate on the international level, to set up best practices and to try to spread those as widely as possible to markets where they haven't necessarily taken off yet.
Yeah, and it's actually, so I would phrase it a little bit differently, that it's neither more nor less. It's just setting the context and continuity so that businesses know what the rules are to operate. And there are some problems that are so large that you can't do at a company level. It has to be at a state level. And so just setting the ground rules so everybody is able to participate and compete on the same playing field, I think that's the most important part of government.